All right. Steve, can you hear me? I'm just going to unmute you a minute, Steve. How you doing, Steve? Right?
Yeah, good. Yourself?
Yeah, good. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, fine.
I'm not going to get everyone on to see if you can hear me, just as long as I can make sure that somebody can hear me. Donna, can you hear me all right? Just put your thumb up if not.
Yeah, I can.
Sweet. You all right?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks.
Good. I promise to get my reversed flattening exercise out on Friday, all right?
Jeez, I was like...
Now I know what you and Jenny were laughing about.
Yeah.
All good. All good. Well, who else have we got here? Brad. Deborah. Nice. Cool. So what I'm going to do shortly, guys, just let a few more people come on board. And then I'm going to share my screen with you with my presentation on it. So at that point, then I'll probably just mute everybody. And then once we get to the end, we'll have some questions. So just write your questions down as we go along so that, I don't keep you up till midnight.
Will you make the presentation available afterwards, or?
Yeah, I'm actually recording this whole thing, Steve. So I'll put it on a private link on YouTube.
Oh, great.
All right.
Thank you.
Cool. Barry, how you doing?
I'm good, mate. Thank you. And you?
Yeah, good. You're not eating on this Zoom call, Barry. Normally on the other Zoom calls, you're eating.
Just finished the banana, mate.
Good man. Cool. Who else? We've got Louise, Deborah, Brad. Awesome. Right. Let's get started. So share that screen. All right, Brad. How you doing? Let me unmute you, all the way from New Zealand.
How are you?
How are you doing, mate? You all right?
Yeah, bloody good, thanks.
Good. Are you? Am I stopping you from going to work?
No, day off today, so.
Oh, that was good timing.
Yeah, it was. It worked out well.
Yeah, good man. How you feeling? All right?
Yeah, no, good, thanks. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Alrighty, cool. Right, let's get cracking. Yeah, I'm just going to mute everyone so that I can, so we don't get too much interference on this. Go. Awesome. Alrighty. So if you can just give me a bit of a thumbs up, if you can see the first slide there, team, and you can hear my voice, that'd be really cool. Awesome. All right, Lou? Awesome stuff. Okay, cool. So now I know that most of you can see that and hear me. That's cool. I'm going to get rid of that little funny screen at the top with everybody's picture in it. And then we'll get cracking. All right? Awesome. Okay, cool. So as you probably figured, tonight's little presentation is about vitamin D. And one of the things, obviously, that I'm pretty passionate about is obviously making sure that from a health perspective, we look after this during the winter. So really it's about giving you, it's not the be all and end all of vitamin D. It's not the inside, but it's just hopefully enough information that you have a better understanding by the end of today as to, what you need to do to try and get your vitamin D levels to an optimum level. and what vitamin D is, etc. Okay, cool. So I guess the first thing is just things that we'll probably go through. What is vitamin D? Where can we get it from? What does it do? Some information around the fact that it's fat soluble and why that's useful to you. A little bit around sort of UVB and UVA rays, okay, just so you understand the difference and how that impacts on that. The other thing as well is just a little bit about geography and how that can affect the your ability to absorb vitamin D at certain times of the year. How it's not just a vitamin, that's actually a hormone as well, okay? And some of the suggested dosages and what you might want to look at in regards to those. All right. So I'm actually going to just give you this slide here at the start and again at the end. And I know that's not kind of normal in a presentation, but if you imagine that this is kind of like the summary of everything that you kind of need to know. For those people who live in the UK now, Brad, I know you live in New Zealand, but you know, in terms of sort of relative position in the world, you know, we could argue that, you know, there are certain limitations there as well. But, you know, certainly the lower part of Australia as well, I know they struggle with vitamin D deficiency as well. So April to October on the left, where we're getting plenty of UVB rays, and October to April in this example in the UK where we're not. Okay, and that's really all to do with the angle of the sun and the way that the UVB rays hit the sun and contact us. So basically, the angle means we just don't get enough of it during those October to April months in the UK. All right. As I said, you can obviously watch this back and you can pause it on this slide, but we're going to go back to it again later on. All right. So the next slide. Oh, there we go. Okay. So what is vitamin D? So vitamin D, a hormone, not just a vitamin. We'll come to more on that later. It aids the absorption of calcium in the gut. Okay, so vitamin D and calcium work together. You'll find that with quite a lot of vitamins, so like vitamin C and iron, for example, another combination. So they work sort of synergistically with each other to help the absorption of one or other of them. Okay, the liver and kidneys convert vitamin D. Vitamin D is produced in the lipid layer just under the skin when the UVB rays hit our body, and then the kidneys and the liver actually convert it into an active hormone which is called calciferol. Okay, and that basically is where it becomes usable in its kind of D3 format that our body recognizes easily. Nearly 90% of the world's population actually has inadequate levels of vitamin D. Okay, and only about 10% of the vitamin D that the body needs comes from food. All right, so dairy products and oily fish are really good, and the rest the body has to kind of make for itself. It's really interesting, actually. There's a really good book called Deep Nutrition. If anybody's like really wants a deep read on nutrition, that is by its name, pretty good definition. But in that book, they talk quite a lot about this idea of nutrigenomics and epigenetics. So the idea that our environment and our food and our lifestyle actually then impacts on our expression and different genes. So within that there was evidence to suggest that actually vitamin D controlled around 800 different genes within our body. So a deficiency in that could then lead to obviously changing of those genes and the way they're made up and the way that we display them. All right. Such things, like in terms of like bone growth and everything like that, in terms of the shape of our faces, etc., over centuries as well. Looking at that, it's really interesting. It's important for cellular metabolism and immunity, as it controls calcium homeostasis and also modulates our response in terms of our innate and adaptive immune system. So when we're under stress, we need more vitamin D to help with that. All right. So vitamin D is actually a hormone. So vitamin D is required for us to help absorb calcium into the bloodstream, okay, through the gut. Vitamin D is mostly produced in the skin in response to sunlight, okay, and it's actually absorbed through food that we eat now, and is also absorbed through food that we eat. So about 10%, as I mentioned earlier, in a balanced diet. it's a pro-hormone, so it's produced photochemically in the skin, just in that little layer just below the skin, all right? Hormone the kidneys produce, okay, and actually controls calcium concentration in the immune system, as I mentioned earlier. And those are the sort of 4 names that you might see it mentioned under there. So calciferol, calciferol, calcidol, and cholecalciferol, okay? So you've got those 4 different names that it hides under. Functions of vitamin D. So promotes the absorption of calcium and phosphorus in the intestine. So phosphorus is another one that's really important in terms of healthy bone growth. Stimulates mineralization, enhances collagen maturation. Okay, so we've got mineralization that happens within the bones. That's what helps give the density to the bones as well. And it also promotes normal growth from childhood. So many of you might have heard of rickets. Okay, it's not that common, or not as common, if you like, in certain more developed areas, although in certainly in some deprived areas within developed countries, you do see it. There is more of a prevalence of it in the kind of Afro-Caribbean and ethnic minorities within the UK. So it does exist within the UK. The food sources that it comes from. Now, vitamin D itself, from diet and supplementation, 2 forms. One from the plant-based, and that tends to be more what we call vitamin D2, okay? And then you've got what's known as vitamin D3, which tends to come from your more kind of animal and fish sources, okay? Now, D3 is the one that we really want, okay, because it's more easily recognized and absorbed by the body. Okay, so just having a quick look at this, and this is quite good because this actually helps to illustrate that, you know, these black lines are kind of your whole food sources, and these little grey smaller lines are your kind of more fortified, so those foods where vitamin D has been added to it. Now, they have to actually add vitamin D to milk formula, okay, for children, right? So that's one way that infants kind of get that in. But if you look here on the left-hand side, it tells you how many international units are in some of these, in these foods, and tells you how many of them. So if we just look, for example, like wild salmon, so 100 grams of that gives you 1,000 international units of vitamin D. If you go here, okay, and we look at the mushrooms, yeah, then we're looking at 1,600. Now, what you've got to remember there is that you'd have to eat quite a few mushrooms every day to get enough vitamin D in, all right? But it is one way of people trying to get vitamin D if they can't, you know, access the sun as much. So we'll talk about more populations that are slightly more at risk of that later. You know, for example, right now, the elderly population, yeah, who are having to shield at the minute, it's quite, you know, it is a concern that they're not going to get much vitamin D. The great thing about vitamin D in many ways is that cooking, storage and processing doesn't really affect it. So it's quite a stable compound. So it means that like things like your oily fish that you kind of keep in a tin, etc., it doesn't negate the benefits of it. Okay, so you actually can store vitamin D pretty well, and that is actually reflected as well in the way that we absorb it. So we can go on holiday and actually, if we go somewhere sunny and we top up on vitamin D, we can actually keep us going for like weeks and months. All right, just by topping up on holiday. So I mentioned earlier about the difference between vitamin D3 and D2. Okay, so D2 tends to come from your plants and D3 from the oily fish. The D3 is more easily absorbed by the body. Okay, your skin makes that D3 when it's exposed to sunlight. Okay, specifically the UVB rays, okay, from sunlight, which triggers that formation of vitamin D3, which is that compound there, 7-dehydrocholesterol in the skin. So just below the skin, yeah, connects into the lipid layer. And that's actually one of the problems with some people who are really lean, is they don't have enough body fat just below the skin. And I mean really lean, okay, where they don't have enough body fat just below the skin, and therefore they actually struggle even with the sunlight to produce vitamin D3, okay? Similar processes happen in plants and mushrooms where the UVB light rays leads to the formation of vitamin D, D2, okay? So, as I said, the plant-based ones are D2, much better if we can get vitamin D3, okay? So factors that may affect the absorption, okay? So it's actually been shown that between 15 and 30 minutes are adequate UVB exposure during the summer months, okay? And you'll read it, like a lot of the literature says about like using it in a swim costume, because there's actually like some evidence that these UVB rays actually, when they direct contact with the thighs and the chest, it's easy, more readily absorbed. Now, there are some theories as to why that is, because for most of us, most of our body fat would be stored kind of around the chest and the stomach and on the thighs. Okay, so therefore, with more fat there in those areas, there is potentially a better chance of you absorbing and creating vitamin D3. All right. So you can see there that creates around 10,000 to 20,000 international units of vitamin D3. Now, we'll come to the RDA later on, the recommended daily allowance, which is actually around 400 to 800 a day, but really that's not enough. So the recommended daily allowance, remember that whenever you see RDA, basically that's just there so that you, it's like for disease avoidance. Yeah, so we're just trying to literally might try not to get ill by having that, but we're not talking about optimal health, and optimal health is nearer 4,000 international units a day. Right. Great thing about vitamin D is that you can store it in the body fat, so it's very difficult to actually become toxic on vitamin D. So obviously you get sunburn, which isn't great, so there's a sort of a potential limit there to the to the exposure you want. You don't want to be getting sunburn in your efforts to get vitamin D. All right. So sun-induced vitamin D symptoms is obviously greatly influenced by the season, the time of day. So between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. is the best time of day to absorb vitamin D. Now, we've already kind of alluded to the fact that between October and April, it's very, very difficult to get enough vitamin D because of the UVB. In fact, it's impossible because of the angle of the sun. The latitude at which you live at, so anything above 33 degrees latitude, we know that between those months you can't get that. Okay, so that's why people tend to go south for a holiday from the UK. Altitude as well, air pollution, skin pigmentation. So if we've got darker skin, it's actually harder for us to absorb, and there is some evidence that there are different time frames that those people need to be in the sun for. Sunscreen use, so like the blocking out of the UVB rays. Now, obviously, you've got this kind of conflict between people wanting to sunbathe and not get sunburn and not get skin cancer as a result of that, and then obviously getting enough UVB so that you don't you don't become deficient in vitamin D. So, I mean, the way that I try and think about this, and certainly since I've learned more about vitamin D, is I'll try and go in the sun for a little bit, maybe 15 to 30 minutes and not get burnt, and then I'll put my sun cream on after that. So that I actually, in my head, I'm trying to get as much vitamin D as possible without getting sunburn. One thing you can't do is sit inside your greenhouse, okay, admiring your tomatoes, and get vitamin D through the glass. The UVB rays don't pass through glass or plastic. All right, hence why older people who tend to be more housebound, particularly at the minute, need to get outside in the sun to actually get this. They can't get it through the window. All right. And also aging affects it as well, so it's harder to absorb it. Additional reasons you could become deficient: breastfeeding, okay, obesity, insufficient dietary fat or inability to absorb dietary fat. Okay, so different people have, unfortunately, had to have operations that mean that they struggle with absorbing fats. Okay. And health conditions that affect the kidney, because we've already mentioned that the kidneys are responsible for producing this kind of like hormone, if you like, the translating that vitamin D into vitamin D3 and then sending it out into the body. Health conditions are actually helped by vitamin D. So atherosclerosis, breast cancer, depression, epilepsy, hypertension, IBS, multiple sclerosis, a lot of evidence around multiple sclerosis, liver disease and kidney disease. Okay. So there's some of the health conditions that can be helped by vitamin D. Symptoms of deficiency, so rickets in children we've already mentioned, bone pain. Okay, now rickets in children and soft bone in adults, osteomalacia. Okay, poor immunity is another one. So somebody who's very sickly, often very tired and fatigued, particularly in the winter months as well. Delayed wound healing, another one. So if you cut yourself and it takes ages to heal, possible sign. Bone and hair loss. That's actually, the hair loss one is a little bit more common as well. And muscle pain as well. So if you are somebody who trains, maybe sort of like taking you longer to recover from doing your training, etc. Another thing to watch out for. All right. Now, vitamin D3 and K2, so vitamin K2. So it's really, I think this is probably one of the sort of more important slides, just to make sure that we reiterate, is that vitamin D can be stored in the body, less likely to become toxic. However, we need to make sure that when we talk about vitamin D and toxicity, we also mention about vitamin K, okay? So as with calcium, vitamin K kind of works with vitamin D to regulate bone resorption, activation, distribution, okay? However, when the levels of vitamin K are inadequate, the situation actually means that we end up with a buildup of osteocalcium proteins in the bone, which basically means that there's a potential for calcium release from the bone. So obviously we're losing bone density at that point, okay? So we need vitamin K to help retain that calcium within the bone. All right. Trouble is, when that calcium then gets released, that calcium is free flowing and it goes around and lines the arteries. And so what then happens is you get that kind of calcification of the arteries, which you don't want. Okay. So vitamin K and vitamin D, really important that work together. So the vitamin D3 supplement that I take is combined with vitamin K2. All right. I take that supplement between October and April, okay, to help with this. And then when we go, generally I tend to try to go to like Tenerife in February and training, and then normally after that I sort of consider myself well topped up, and normally, you know, I don't take it as religiously after that if I've been there. All right, but vitamin K, like vitamin D, two variants. So vitamin K1 found in your kind of green leafy veggies, vegetables and beans, and vitamin K2 is found more in your kind of, and it's more bioavailable, comes in your kind of fish, your offal, your meat, your dairy products, and your and fermented cheeses. Okay. Fat soluble vitamins. So many of you may be familiar with the fact that there are 4 fat soluble vitamins, and they're A, D, E, and K. And all the other vitamins that we take on are water soluble. Fat solubility affects 2 things. Okay, how well the vitamin is absorbed with fat containing meals. Okay, and how long it's stored in your body. Okay, being fat soluble, as vitamin D is, kind of double-edged. So on one hand, you can store those vitamins in your body and your fatty liver, which means you don't necessarily need to intake. Okay, but on the other hand, means that we also don't need to necessarily take it on every day. All right, because we can go and have a sunny vacation, yeah, and enough is stored so that you might even last you weeks and months. All right, so fat soluble really is a great benefit, if you like. So with that in mind, obviously you're going to take your vitamin D with fat, all right? And the reason you do that is so that it's more easily absorbed, okay? We need to kind of know how much fat to take it with is quite useful. So some people take a vitamin D containing multivitamin in the morning, either with coffee or an empty stomach. And that, to be honest with you, might not be the best idea, because the idea of taking a fat soluble vitamin for me would be that you take it with a meal that's predominantly fat. So I tend to have mine with my breakfast, which normally contains eggs, yeah, which is a good source of fat. Actually also contains a small amount of vitamin D as well. So for me, if I were you, I'd take it with something that's got a little bit more fat in it. Okay, not like loads of fat, but like kind of a low to moderate amount of fat. So, and there's been some studies done that showed like 11 grams of fat leads to higher absorption than kind of 35 grams or 0 grams. So somewhere in the middle, yeah, of that kind of, 35 to 0, yeah, somewhere in the middle there, we're aiming for in terms of fat. But I wouldn't get too caught up on that. Most important thing is you're taking the vitamin D3 with something that's got some fat in it. All right. Just a little bit more information there on that. So somewhere like 15 to 30%, less absorption than if you don't have if you don't have any, than if you have some. High fat meal, potentially, I need to make sure you get a balanced argument here. So a high fat meal may potentially lead to a lower absorption than a moderate fat meal. In terms of the previous experiments, that high fat meal would be around 35 grams of fat, which roughly equates to sort of around 3 eggs plus a coffee with cream. So, 2 or 3 eggs without the cream, probably not too far out. Okay. When you synthesize vitamin D from sun exposure, it skips the fat absorption kind of issue altogether. So you haven't got this kind of, you don't need to eat fat when you're sat in the sun, if that makes sense, because it kind of hits the lipid layer under the skin, and then you have that kind of absorption happening there. So that is quite useful, particularly with sort of elderly people who have like sort of intestinal issues and absorption, if they can get some sun, then that might be really useful for them. Okay. Geography. So I've already sort of mentioned it a little bit, but anything above 33 degrees latitude from October to April, because it's an angle called the zenith angle. So if you want to look it up, zenith angle where it hits the screen that cannot absorb enough vitamin or UVB rays at that time. Okay. In terms of, for those of you who are interested in exercise, okay, we're going to get, so our muscles have vitamin D3 receptors. They're called you'll see them labeled as VDR within them, and scientists have suggested there's a direct link between vitamin D and skeletal activity. So what they've also found is that people who train have more of these VDR receptors. Okay, and they found a few recent studies have actually found that increasing levels of blood levels of vitamin D have shown increases in muscle strength, power, and muscle mass. So by actually having more vitamin D in the bloodstream, you have the potential for more muscular strength, more power, and to maintain more muscle mass. Okay. Deficiency, on the flip side, it also has what they call catabolic. So anabolic being building, catabolic being, chewing away at, if you like, effects on muscles and causing weakness, impairs of the cross bridges. So when a muscle contracts and then contracts under tension and lengthens, you get this kind of breaking down of the cross bridges. Now, in normal circumstances, if you've got enough protein happening and enough recovery, those layers actually form over the top of each other and recover. But what they're saying there is that if there's the lack of vitamin D, we don't necessarily get that cross bridge formation happening, and therefore there will be a less strength and a reduced athletic performance. Okay. The last thing there, sort of due to the increase in enzymatic activity of exercise, those who exercise intensely may be as susceptible, if not more susceptible, becoming vitamin D deficient, because obviously we're potentially using more of it up. So what we have is that kind of counter argument of, okay, so we've got more muscle mass, so therefore we have the potential to absorb more vitamin D, but equally we're using more of it up as part of our daily activity. So something to sort of bear in mind there as well. All right. So as I mentioned earlier, the RDA is the recommended daily allowance in adults. Now 400 to 800 international units in adults. It's too low. Okay, so as I said, that RDA is really based around disease avoidance. Okay, now we want health and optimal performance. So from a lot of the studies that I read, like the kind of upper tolerable limit is 4,000 international units per day. Now you'll see like some studies like to use 10,000 international units on one day at the end of the week and see the impact of that. But the most successful interventions seem to be those with up to about 4,000 international units a day. Okay, regularly. So that brings us back to that first slide that I showed you earlier on, which April to October on the left. Okay, and hopefully everything I've described now sort of summarizes that. So here we are in the sun, April to October in the UK. Flip it around in the southern hemisphere. 20 to 30 minutes relaxing in the sun. You can see this is not me, by the way. You can see he's got his gym suit on, okay, and he's got exposure there. You could potentially argue that it'd be better lying down there because you can actually absorb more UVB rays when you're lying down than you can when you're stood up, just because of the angle that they hit you at. You could be at risk of deficiency between October and April, so really that should be over there, but you get the idea. If you've got dark skin, if you work indoors, if you work in sort of urban living conditions, okay, you don't supplement in the winter, and you always wear sun cream from the outset, so you minimize the amount of UVB rays that get through. Now, obviously, there are different sun protections that you can get. I don't normally go out too many places without a factor 50 on, to be honest with you, but colour my skin. So 20 to 30 minutes with the sun on you, face, forearms. Yeah, we've already discussed kind of that chest, and also in the quads as well, on the legs, between 10 and 3. Try not to burn, wear a swimsuit. Yes, a few little references there. In the winter, here are your examples of your foods that contain it. Now, I've already shown you that table, which basically illustrates how it's very difficult to even get the amount of food that you need to get your vitamin D in. Okay, so you might want to consider vitamin D supplementation. I would always recommend getting a blood test if you're unsure, and then you can kind of supplement appropriately then. All right, off the back of that. The other thing as well, which we haven't touched on that much, I did mention it earlier though, in terms of immunity. So there has been some evidence that having low vitamin D status, or even then supplementing with it, reduces your effect by supplementing with it, actually reduces your effect, your chances of getting upper respiratory tract infections in your blood. So getting vitamin D levels in your blood to an optimal level will help that. Okay. Potential signs that you're deficient in vitamin D, we talked a little about earlier. So fatigue, mood swings, musculoskeletal pain, muscle weakness, decreased pain threshold, slightly increased blood pressure. That's obviously caused by a number of things. Decreased endurance fitness levels. But you do really need to have a proper blood test done to know where you're truly at. Okay. Supplement daily with vitamin D3, potentially up to 4,000 international units a day. Take with fat, so things like olives, avocado, coconut oil, fish, eggs, those sorts of things, to aid the absorption. Try to get UVB rays, okay, as opposed to UVA. Get a blood test during those winter months to test out. All right. So in terms of blood tests, you can there's one that we have access to through a lab that we use. And it's underneath what they call a sports blood test profile, but they also, as part of that, test vitamin D, along with other important sort of 14 different things that they test for as well at the same time. Okay, so you can test for it, is basically what I'm saying. And what they do is they send you a little kit. You put your blood into that little kit and send it off, and then within 3 days they send you a result back, and then we can give you the results to them. So if you want to know more about that, you can go to that link there, which is basically tamarperformancecenter.com/blood-profiling, and then you can read a little bit more about blood testing there. All right. And then I've got about 300 references, all right, which I've copied and pasted below, but I wasn't going to try and put them all on one slide. So if anybody loves reading all that sort of stuff, then these are some of the references that I used during my studying. All right. Now, what I want to do now is, obviously we're recording this live, is I want to basically bring any questions that you guys might have. So if you've got a particular question that you want to ask, then just stick your thumb up, and then I'll do my best to unmute you and answer your question. If you don't have any questions, then that's cool. I'll shut up. Let me... Oh, I've actually unmuted everybody. So if you're playing your guitar, maybe stop. All right, Steve.
Yeah, just a quick question, Matt, on the recommended supplements.
Yep.
Have you got any that you particularly point us at?
Oh, okay. So really, I mean, I'm always a little bit wary about recommending a particular brand, although the one that I use are called Zest, if you want to know which ones I use. I think the key thing is to make sure you get your vitamin D3, and then it comes with K2.
Yeah.
I think that's like one of the biggest mistakes you'll find. Vitamin D3 is such a cheap supplement. It's unbelievable. You can't really believe how good it is and how cheap it is. It's just like, it's one of those things. It's, for how good it is, it should be the most expensive supplement going. The vitamin D3 and K2, brands like Solgar, pretty good, pretty reputable. Zest as well, the one that I've used. There are others as well, though.
Yeah. But is it best to go for a targeted supplement or a multivitamin?
In this instance, I personally, because again, when you go for a multivitamin, what you tend to find, if you look on the back, is you're barely getting enough of any of it to make any difference. Yeah.
Okay.
Even in a multivitamin, if it contains magnesium, rarely getting anywhere near what really you want. It's like 400 milligrams a day, or you rarely get anywhere near that. So if I'm going to take one, firstly, consider why you're taking it. So potentially off the back of results from a blood test, if you really are worried about one area or not, or then secondly, you go, okay, well, am I actually getting anywhere near what's an effective dosage? So, you know,
And is it easy to convert the dosage that they recommend into these international units?
just quickly Google it, Steve, if you're not sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, if you're not sure, just do that, because you can do that. I mean, yeah, I wouldn't know like micrograms to international units without looking up as well.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions, team? John, sorry, I only just added you, mate. I didn't see that, but I have recorded this, mate, so I'll send it.
Oh yeah, mate, that'd be sweet. Yeah, I was a little bit late to the party. I was eating dinner.
Priorities. Good man. Cool. Any other questions? We all good? All right, Amanda?
Yes, thank you. How are you?
Good. Donna,
Okay.
you look like you're falling asleep.
Question. I know. I'm trying not to.
Sorry, Amanda. What did you say?
I was just saying, with regard to taking the D3, we take it from like October through to May, and then we finish. Then hopefully, as you say, we get enough sunlight.
That's So it's kind of like end of September, beginning of October,
Yeah.
through to the beginning of April, really.
Oh, right. Okay. Cool. Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, you're right.
And then, in theory, after that, with the sunlight in England, we should get enough through the skin. Yeah. Okay. Great.
I mean,
Thank
it is a little bit dependent on lifestyle.
Sure.
what food
Yeah.
you wear, you know, etc.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's brilliant. Thank you.
Louise, you all good? Oh, you're muted. I'll unmute you. Oh no, I can't. Okay. All
Yeah.
good, Lou?
All good.
Cool.
All good. Fascinating stuff, Matt. Yeah, brilliant.
Cool. Excellent. Glad you enjoyed. Barry, you all good, mate?
Yeah, good, mate. Yeah, really interesting. Yeah, it's good.
Good. I can see you've put your UVB light on above you already. You'll be tanning in a minute.
That's quite interesting, because obviously I struggle when it's cold with breathing a bit sometimes. So it'll be interesting to see if that has an effect.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably not like a direct link, but like we said about sort of like the potential chance for
Yes.
upper respiratory infections as a result of a
Yeah.
deficiency in vitamin D. You know, potentially there.
Mm.
So couldn't rule it out. Cool. Is everyone happy?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. That was great. Really
John,
Very
interesting.
I'll get that sent over to you. All right.
Legend, mate. Cheers.
All right. Have a nice
Great.
week, John.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks,
Cheers,
Matt.
Bye.
Yeah, thanks, mate. That was really good. Thank you.